The Balance, journalism without agenda.
Hi there, folks. Welcome along to this Balance VIDCAST on the current situation in Israel and Gaza. It's Sunday afternoon here in Auckland, New Zealand, so overnight in the Middle East at the moment. And this situation is escalating so fast that I'm not even really going to bother talking about death tolls and casualties as such, because it will change so quickly. We know how fast these conflicts escalate. So I think we'll mention it along the way, but I'm not going to really focus too much on that. As ever, I want to focus on context, on explaining a bit more about this whole situation, because, for the first time in 18 years maybe, I find myself as an independent journalist during a Gaza war. I've presented news and rolling coverage through 2, 3 full wars, I think, numerous conflicts or unrest or flare-ups or whatever it gets called. So it is interesting, certainly for me, to watch this from the outside and also to have a look at the way that other media are covering it and the angles they're taking, because this is clearly different. Usually we have, quote-unquote, a war on Gaza. This time we have a direct Gaza or Hamas attack on Israel, which will then escalate. It is different, and I think the really important thing for us to do here is to look at the short-term situation, which is an acute conflict, which is only likely to get worse. And then we have to obviously look at the long-term, which is the fact that Gaza has been under blockade for 16 years. And that is what gives rise to these situations. The really important thing is that you cannot look at one without the other. You cannot say, oh, there's a short-term issue here and it's terrible what's happened and one side has to stop. One side is the aggressor, one side has to stop. You have to look at the long-term situation as well. It is not an either-or situation. Now, what we're going to start with is, you know me, I love maps, so let's do the map, the Google map. This is the region, of course, the Middle East. As we zoom in, you look at Israel there, center of frame. The Gaza Strip, it is this tiny little enclave on the Mediterranean. And if you go down to the south, first of all, that's the border with Egypt. And if you follow the yellow line all the way to the north of the Gaza Strip into the area called southern Israel, we're talking about 41 kilometers there. Okay, it's a tiny, tiny little area, 41 kilometers top to bottom. And in that little area, we're talking 2 million plus people. 2 million people crammed into a strip of land that's 42 kilometers long. Now, comparisons, let's try to put it in perspective here. So this is the Palestinian territories marked in pink. West Bank is included there, but we're just looking at Gaza, the small strip in the middle. That's New Zealand overlaid the top, just the North Island of New Zealand. You can see, New Zealand often considered a very small country. You can see how much bigger it is, or really how much smaller Gaza is. Here is the UK, or really just England, actually. I mean, it's extraordinary how small this Gaza area is. And if we're talking, well, actually, let me show you this one first, and then I'll tell you why I've got it. This is Guinea-Bissau, which is a small country in West Africa. Why am I putting it there? Because it's got the same kind of population, right? We're talking upwards of 2 million people there in that country, spread out, as opposed to 2 million in that tiny Gaza Strip. And another comparison, not so much for population here, but again, just perspective. This is Long Island in New York, which has a population of over 7 million. So 7 million in that big Long Island, and 2 million are in that tiny little bit in pink. Okay, so that's our geography lesson over. Let's get now into this, as I say, short-term versus long-term analysis. Short-term situation is that Hamas has attacked Israel from Gaza in a way that we simply have not seen before, and has absolutely caught Israel napping. That's what's so extraordinary, I think, that an army and a country as sophisticated and advanced as Israel just didn't see this coming. Usually, let me tell you how it usually goes. A war will escalate from something comparatively smaller. It will be something like increased rocket fire from Gaza, or a skirmish at the border where maybe someone from Gaza tries to get over and is shot by the Israelis, and or a hostage is taken, or something to that effect. And that's where it escalates from. This time, Hamas has just come straight in with this huge attack by, to use the old cliche, by land, air, and sea. But that's exactly what's happened. Huge number of rockets being fired. Reports of Hamas fighters paragliding into Israeli territory, breaking the border fence and coming across. It's really amazing, actually, the force with which Hamas was able to strike and to do it without Israel knowing it was coming. Now, of course, that raises questions about the blockade, doesn't it? And we'll talk more about the blockade when we talk long term. But, there's this 16-year blockade on the Gaza Strip, which has had a terrible humanitarian toll and stops people from leaving and controls everything coming in and out. But Hamas has still been able to smuggle in all this weaponry from its allies in the region, the likes of Iran and Syria. And it's been able to amass this huge arsenal for this big surprise attack. Hamas reckons it fired 5,000 rockets in this initial attack. Israel says it's more like 2,200. Regardless, whichever number it is, in the whole conflict of 2014, which was 50 days long, Hamas fired 4,000 rockets over the 50 days. So even if it got the lower estimate of 2,200 in this initial attack, it's still that the scale has changed completely. And again, I go back to the point, the fact that Israel was caught napping and just didn't see any of this coming. So what'll happen now? Israel will retaliate, because that's what they do. And they will, frankly, rain hell down upon Gaza. We've seen it before. I think because of the scale of this attack from Hamas, Israel will hit even harder, and will do so with the support of a lot of the international community, because they will look at this attack and think it's terrible what's been done. And it is. There's been a lot of deaths, there's been kidnappings, but I feel the normal level of support for Israel will swell. In fact, look at this example. This is a tweet from none other than the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, this is a guy who knows a lot about being oppressed, having a bigger country effectively trying to squash yours, and yet he talks about horrible news from Israel. He doesn't mention the Palestinians at all, anywhere in this, and this is only half the tweet, or the X, and he says, we have faith that order will be restored, terrorists will be defeated, Israel's right to self-defense is unquestionable. I find that quite interesting, that Volodymyr Zelensky is saying that, and I think that will be reflected by large parts of the international community. You also have to remember that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has had all sorts of legal issues. He's not popular. There have been protests against him. He's been trying to nullify the judiciary in Israel and what it can actually do, or at least give the government more power over the judiciary. So, I hate saying this thing, but there's nothing like a war to rally people around, is there? Wars can be obviously very divisive within countries, but in this situation, I think it will probably galvanize the Israeli people, who will rally around the flag, as they say, and Netanyahu will use that and will play off that, because he's not got a lot of other support out there. The suffering on Gaza will be huge. It always is. And this is when you have to remember the difference between Israel and Gaza. There have been attacks on Israelis now, which have been shown and documented, and people are shocked by it. The people in Gaza, when they are attacked, they can't go anywhere. They're locked in. So when there's a missile coming down on your building, you could go out into the street where you could still be injured or killed. It's an open-air prison is the way it's described. So that, when you are watching the pictures of what's happening in Israel, think about what will happen in Gaza as well, and the comparative force that will be used, and the fact that those people in Gaza can't get out. Okay, let's look at the long-term situation here, because it's this which gives rise to cycle upon cycle of violence that we see in the Middle East. And rather than go into any deep analysis. I think if I just let the facts do the talking, you'll see the picture. I've already said Gaza is an open air prison, basically, because the borders are controlled by Israel and Egypt. You can't come and go, even for medical treatment. All goods coming in are controlled by Israel. The power, the electricity is controlled by Israel as well. They can and do switch it off when they want to. So when you put 2 million people into a small bit of land and don't let them out, there's going to be problems. The people of Gaza are ruled by Hamas, which is viewed broadly by the West as a terrorist group. You've got, of course, the other major Palestinian territory, the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority is in charge. They are unable to help the people in Gaza and actually are seen as complicit in the Israeli occupation because they cooperate with Israel on so many things and people in Gaza feel our own so-called leadership, the Palestinian Authority, doesn't stand up for us. There's also a feeling that the international community has let down the people of Gaza. Even when they see what happens, they see the humanitarian suffering and they see what happens during these wars, nothing happens. It'll go to the Security Council, it'll be vetoed by the United States because it supports Israel, and it's rinse and repeat, basically. I think what it comes down to in the end is that there's just no hope for people in Gaza. That if you are 16 years old, you've lived your entire life under blockade. If you are older than that, you've lived under occupation and blockade for most of your life. And there's never been any sign of that changing. So is it really surprising that they choose to fight back in this manner, that the Hamas leadership says, this is the way, this is the only way we're going to make any inroads? Now, of course, the flip side of that, and they know this, they must know this, that every time Hamas fights against Israel, Israel fights back with 10 times the force that they've got. And they know more people will die, and they know more of their cities will be destroyed. And they know that it will only probably take them further away from any sort of resolution. And yet still, they do it. I'm paraphrasing here from something I saw on social media today, but someone said it's like, for the Palestinian fighters, for the people in Gaza, it's the difference between living on your knees or dying on your feet. Just a quick word before we go on media coverage. I don't think I am speaking out of turn or revealing any great state secrets here when I say that the Western media generally follows the Israeli narrative, or certainly gives more prominence to the Israeli narrative than that of the Palestinians. You can argue that if you want. I think there's plenty of evidence that it does do that, and I'm talking historically as well here. The Israeli side of the whole Middle East conflict has always been told more and in more depth and breadth than the Palestinian side. So I start to look at some of the major news channels and what they've been saying, and let me say, it is not inaccurate. Israel attacked from Gaza is 100% accurate. But I haven't seen these sorts of things before, like, Israel under attack, a big line like that. And I just will be interested if that changes at all when, inevitably, Gaza gets absolutely pounded by the Israeli military and it becomes more of a war on Gaza again. I will be interested to see if these networks change their branding, as it's called. No surprise that Al Jazeera has gone for Gaza-Israel war. That is geographical, rather than even saying Hamas-Israel war. That doesn't surprise me at all, and the coverage coming out on Al Jazeera will be far more in-depth of what's happening on the Palestinian side than you will see anywhere else. Okay, so I think we'll leave it there for this vidcast. As I said at the start, the situation will move very, very quickly. So I was very conscious about not making this too time sensitive, which is why I haven't gone into death tolls and casualty numbers, not because I don't think they're important, obviously. They are incredibly important on both sides, but they will change very, very quickly. I suspect I will do more of these vidcasts as this war escalates. You wouldn't suspect that it would end anytime soon. So if there's something further you want me to discuss, or you've got some questions, please leave them in the comments, send a reply on social media, and I can compile those and give you my thoughts in our next vidcast, which, as I say, will probably be coming up quite soon. But for now, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you again soon.
Read, watch and listen online at the Balanced website.